Good morning, everyone. Buenos días and welcome. Welcome, bienvenidos, bienvenidas, bienvenides. This session is being recorded, so please note that. And this is now your opportunity to put on a blank screen if you'd like. I am Dr. María Pérez y González. I am the Deputy Chairperson of the Department of Puerto Rican and Latino Studies at Brooklyn College. Welcome. And the class that you are entering this world today is the Puerto Rican and Latino Studies 2105, Latinx, New York Latinx Culture and the Arts. And today's special session is West Side Story, the Brooklyn Connection Lecture Series. And so the first thing I'd like to do is to acknowledge that this is the unceded territory of the Lenape indigenous peoples. We need to learn about and commit ourselves to beginning the process of dismantling ongoing legacies of settler colonialism and to recognize the hundreds of indigenous nations who continue to resist, live, and uphold their sacred relations across their lands. May we remember to uplift and honor indigenous ancestors each and every day. We acknowledge that for the first time, the United States has officially recognized Indigenous Peoples Day. And it is fitting that this day falls within the National Latinx Heritage Month since we share those roots. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to make a couple of acknowledgments. Ms. Matilda Nistal has created all of the individual flyers for this special events, and so thank you for that. She is the Pearls Office Administrator. And we have for the first time with us Alex Suarez, who is now our technical assistant. So thank you for joining us. This is a wonderful and unique lecture series. The Department of Pearls, Puerto Rican Latino Studies. The course is offered as part of the Intercultural Competency rubric in general education. The focus is West Side Story, and I am teaching that course, and the centerpiece is this lecture series, which Dr. Sanchez Korrol made possible. This course centers the 10-time Academy Award-winning film from 1961 as connected to the forthcoming December 21 release of the version, produced by Steven Spielberg, Tony Kushner, Christy McCosco-Krieger, Kevin McConnell, and Rita Moreno. Our course explores the artistic and cultural impact of West Side Story through the lenses of the humanities and social sciences, highlighting topics of Puerto Rico's history with the USA, immigration, ethno-racial relations, gender, gangs, language, music, character analysis, and the like. Professor Emerita of Pearls and recipient of the 2020 Herbert H. Lehman Prize for Distinguished Service in New York History, Dr. Virginia Sanchez Korrol, served as historical consultant to West Side Story. Together, we've organized a lecture series of special guests connected with the film to share their expertise, experiences, and insight for students as they move through the socio-historic background and artistry of West Side Story. And I want to express that the speakers are here out of the goodness of their hearts, out of their willingness and commitment to Pearls, to students, to Brooklyn College, to letting people know, right, about West Side Story and to share their expertise. Dr. Sanchez Korrol is my co-host and chaired the Department of Pearls from 1989 to 2004 and was founding president of the Puerto Rican Studies Association. Her numerous publications include From Colonia to Community, The History of Puerto Ricans in New York, and the 3-volume Latinas in the United States, a historical encyclopedia. Her forthcoming book, 2021, co-edited with me, we partnered together to produce, is entitled Puerto Rican Studies in the City University of New York, the First 50 Years. And I will show you the cover very quickly. It's coming out. It's beautiful. So I just wanted to show that to you and share that with you. And that should be coming out shortly. Okay. So let me see if I can get back to this. Um, I wanted to let you know, right, that in terms of the Q&A, we will have that toward the end. You can write your questions in the chat and I will pose that to our distinguished speaker. Also, my students, right? Please share your names with me, direct message me in the chat, okay? Just so that I know you're here. Without further ado, I'm going to now introduce our distinguished speaker. Dr. Ernesto Acevedo-Muñoz is Professor of Cinema Studies and Chair of the Department of Cinema Studies and Moving Image Arts at the University of Colorado, Boulder. He is the author of the books West Side Story as Cinema, The Making and Impact of an American Masterpiece from 2013. This is it. Ah, okay. And he is the author of Pedro Almodóvar and Buñuel and Mexico, The Crisis of National Cinema from 2003. His works have appeared in many journals and anthologies, including Quarterly Review of Film and Video, Literature, Film and History, Letras Peninsulares, Short Film Studies, forgive my French, Mise au Point, After Hitchcock, Authorship in Film Adaptation, the companion to Luis Buñuel, Genre, Gender, Race, and World Cinema, Contemporary Spanish Cinema, and Genre, El Impacto de la Metrópolis, La Experiencia Americana en Lorca, Dali y Buñuel, Hollywood at the Intersection of Race and Identity, and the Bloomsbury Companion to Stanley Kubrick. He teaches courses on film history and theory, Hollywood genres, Spanish and Latin American cinemas, and on directors Luis Buñuel, Pedro Almodóvar, Alfred Hitchcock, and Stanley Kubrick. By the way, he also has an IMDb page, which I saw, and you can read more about him there. So without further ado, I will present to you Dr. Ernesto Acevedo-Muñoz.
I confess the IMDb page is mostly because I used to do a lot of student films when I was younger, but that's mostly it anyway. Thank you, Dr. Pérez y González, and my colleague and yet friend, Dr. Virginia Sanchez Korrol. We've had the opportunity to work together a little bit on the upcoming West Side Story movie, and I'm really honored to be a member, a participant in this series, to be able to share a little bit of what I know or made up about West Side Story, and certainly glad to see a room full of people with interest in this topic that is so close to us in so many ways, right? And particularly in the juncture that not by chance we have this resurgence of interest in West Side Story as a piece of really important American art in every way we look at it. So, Virginia, did you want to guide me a little bit?
I have a lot of questions, yes. Well, first of all, welcome to Brooklyn College. It is a pleasure and an honor to have you here, a person of your knowledge and expertise and experience, who has done so much in Spanish language theater. And welcome to the lovely audience that's watching, that has tuned in. So here are my, this is where I really, well, you're going to explain it, I'm sure, but Ernesto, Buñuel, Almodóvar, Kubrick, Dali, ¿y quién más? You have been delving into Hitchcock también. You have been delving into Spanish theater for the most part, Spanish arts, the Spanish movies, and particularly looking at Buñuel and Almodóvar. My goodness, you could spend a lifetime just studying the work of those two filmmakers. And I'm always very, very much impressed with how Almodovar deals with women and directs a strong Spanish women. My favorite film of all time is Volver. And I think yeah, well, it's my favorite film is Volver. Yes. And so West Side Story, how does that come in? Where do you begin? Also, I'm intrigued by the fact that your background is basically in Puerto Rico, and West Side Story is a story about the diaspora. And so, what attracted you, and how did you get into it?
Well, the short answer is that it was the other way around. As a Puerto Rican and a movie lover from childhood, West Side Story was always part of my life. We've heard Tony Kushner said a couple of weeks ago, like we heard Bobby Sanabria a month ago, as we've all heard interviews. Steven Spielberg mentioned one of the albums that were part of the soundtrack of our lives as children, men of a certain age, was West Side Story, either the Broadway cast recording from 1957 or the 1961 album from the Robert Wise movie that I wrote about. So we had the movie album, and eventually, and that played in the background. We were mostly raised on classical music. My father was a classical music fan. One of the few popular music albums, and I think Steven Spielberg has said a very similar thing in his experience. One of the few popular music albums that were allowed to play in my house was West Side Story. So we had Aida and West Side Story. We had Tosca and West Side Story. And I'm grateful to my father. I mean, I'm an opera lover, and of course, West Side Story features opera voices, so it fell under a certain spectrum category, and also, of course, Warner Brothers cartoons, because they had classical music, so we could go there. Kill the wabbit, kill the wabbit. Hey, that's Wagner right there. But so as a child, I was enamored with West Side Story. We've never seen Puerto Ricans in movies in any form, even if they were fake Puerto Ricans. I mean, most of them. But the words Puerto Rico were spoken in the soundtrack. We knew that it was something unique. And then a little later, I want to say probably around 1979, as being movie lover, my father, we were like the second family in town to have a videotape, a home video player. That was a Betamax, a Sony Betamax, which was then the format. And I think, we had, eventually we acquired 3 movies on Betamax tapes, Superman, Grease, and West Side Story. And so then it became, and then I was really enthralled by the color. I mean, eventually I wrote a lot about this because I was interested in the visual design of the movie, and I didn't even know what I was talking about, but it was, or what it was, but I knew that it was very enthralling visually. Eventually, I did my Bachelor of Arts in history at the University of Puerto Rico. I graduated from the UPR in 1991, where I was a history major, but I was lucky enough to be admitted to the University of Iowa, at the time, one of the most prestigious cinema studies departments for graduate school. I knew I wanted to be to study film, and then eventually my history background and my interest in film led to what most of my work would fall under film history, right? I think of myself as a film historian, but we didn't have a lot of movies to work with, so I thought I was going to write a dissertation on Latin American, like an intellectual history of Latin American cinemas, going to like the 19th century foundational romance, and then looking for patterns in those movies. And then one day I was on a train from Madrid to Barcelona on the only student loan I took as a graduate student. Thank you, University of Iowa, was so that I could do a little bit of Europe. And I picked up a book on the train station bookstore called My Last Sigh, Luis Buñuel's. Actually, I bought it in Spanish, Mi Último Suspiro, Luis Buñuel's sort of autobiography. And that changed my trajectory for a while. By the time I got to Barcelona, I wanted to write about Luis Buñuel. And that became a dissertation topic, which was my first book, Buñuel and Mexico, The Crisis of National Cinema, where his critics tended to want to take Buñuel out of Mexico. And I argued, maybe you can take Buñuel out of Mexico, but you can't take Mexico out of Buñuel. So that was mostly putting Buñuel's Mexican movies in the context of the Mexican film industry. And Buñuel's immediate heirs were Carlos Saura and Pedro Almodóvar. So, and then I'd seen Almodóvar's movies when I was still in college, probably Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown and High Heels, Tacones Lejanos. And I fell in love with those movies. But West Side Story was always in the background. When I was lucky enough to land a tenure track appointment at the University of Colorado, naturally, the first book was supposed to be expected to be based on my dissertation. That was Buñuel and Mexico. Extrapolating from that and a lot of other work on Spanish cinema, I ended up with Almodóvar because I was genuinely interested, right? Although I confess now, I haven't been interested in Almodóvar's movies for a long time. I don't think he's made a genuinely interesting movie, probably since Volver. Although Talk to Her is my favorite now. It's really so stunning. But ultimately, and these are the things that those of us in the academic profession, we understand. West Side Story was always in the background. When I was awarded tenure, I said, well, now I can do whatever I want. And I'm gonna go back to my first love as a Puerto Rican, but also now with the experience and the comfort of an academic position that allowed me to research, to expand on things that I was interested in. So I've often joked, I was married to Luis Buñuel. I had an affair with Pedro Almodóvar, but I was always in love with West Side Story. So it was only natural. And then I became the genre studies person at the University of Colorado because we didn't really have a genre studies person. And I designed a course called the Hollywood Musical, for which the centerpiece became West Side Story. That was the anchor. So we sort of led to it, and then from it, and it fell right under, around midterm. And the questions I kept getting from my students about West Side Story then led me to say, I need to go further into this. And with the comfort of tenure and the support of the institution and very good research assistants, I said, okay, I'm going to write a book on West Side Story. I think this needs to be done while I must try to keep some intellectual distance, because it's not just going to be a fanboy letter. I have to go deep. I have to do research, build a book that makes sense. And that's how we ended up with West Side Story, which ultimately was my only bestseller.
Well, now going to your book, as a historian, I am very, very much interested in knowing how you went about that research, because I have never read such detailed information, such detailed supportive facts and background information as you include in your book. And sometimes in some of the areas where you are writing about, for example, the production itself or the amount of time that it took, or certainly when you get to the colors and how color and works in so so importantly in West Side Story. But I was thinking you must have snuck into somebody's mailbox at some point to get the little itty bits of messages and information and the fights and the anger and the rancor and the lateness and everything that went into it. Take us away from much of the criticism that's been leveled against the 1961 film from the Puerto Rican Latino community. You're looking at a work of art and how that work of art is put together. How did you manage that? And
that's important for what I meant in terms of distancing myself as a fan and as a Puerto Rican who acknowledges all the problems of that movie. But no, I want to look at the movie as, like the title of my book says, as cinema. Yes, eventually we get to the political stuff. We get to the political stuff on chapter 5, right? We get to the political stuff when I'm going on the sequence by sequence analysis, right? Which is like in the middle of the book. But first, the visual design of the movie was it was logical. It made sense, from costumes to lighting to special effects, which was quite groundbreaking photographic visual effects. Because if a movie is not interesting visually, then I'm not interested in it. It has to be interesting visually first, right? And with support from the university and some extraordinary research assistants, I had the opportunity of going to where historians go, to the archive, to the library, to look indeed at boxes and boxes of documents that Robert Wise had donated to the University of Southern California Cinema Studies Library and the Margaret Herrick Library of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. That's where the documents are. They are in collections, right? And then having the patience and the time to sometimes go, you're right, not just box by box, but page by page, and finding maybe 2 or 3 documents away from each other, just a bill for the shoe lifts for George Shakiris, and then a letter where essentially the Myrish brothers are firing Jerry Robbins, and having the excitement for the historian, which you know better than me because you've been doing this much more thoroughly than I have for many years. The thrill of the historian when we find a document that we know, yeah, I've heard people talk about this, but I don't know anyone who's seen this document. It's really essential, and it allowed me to build, as the structure of the book indicates, to build kind of a prehistory of West Side Story, a history of the making of West Side Story. We don't have to go into every day of production to give a good idea of how complex the production was. And then you might recall at the end of the introduction, it says, if you haven't seen West Side Story in a while, put the book down and go watch the movie and then come back. And if you've never seen the movie, put down the book, go watch the movie and then come back. Because people are afraid of spoilers or whatever, although any movie that can be ruined by spoilers is not worth watching to begin with. And then we get to chapter 3, which is the meat, as I like to think of it. This is it. This is the meat, scene by scene, visual and sound and production design analysis. This is what the movie is, piece by piece. And in its own merits, artistically, it's a great movie. And then let's see what happened after, and finally then get to the political problem, right? Where the operating phrase is Bernardo was right in all the implications of that expression, as Anita makes it in the show and in the movie. Bernardo was right? But I can't start there. I have to start with the movie itself before I let myself out as not just as a fan of the movie, but also as trying to understand that the movie is not as, or the show, but the movie more is not as passive as some of the critics would like to point. No, not at all. There is genuine dissent, there is genuine resentment, there is genuine political content that these sharks, the 1961 sharks, and Anita in particular, are able to expose, right? Bernardo was right. Terrible time in America. Yes, that's where we land, but how did we get there? And that's where the research goes, right? And it's still not perfect, but it's not a passive text, and that's what, frankly, pisses me off of so much of the criticism that I read in preparation for the book.
I'd like to jump in, if I might. Exactly right there, right? In the chapter of Bernardo was right. For those of us who didn't see, right, the movie perhaps, can you just tell us a little bit about the context of that, right? And then in that chapter, you say that West Side Story sort of predicted the end of the classical musical era. That West Side Story has a dystopian rather than a utopian conclusion, right, of social reality. So expand on that, explain that to us, so that we get a better understanding of what you meant there.
Right, and the core of the contribution of the 1961 movie to me resides in the revision of the America lyrics, which we know are two very different sets of lyrics written by Stephen Sondheim and Leonard Bernstein as well for the 1957 show. By the time the movie went into pre-production, the screenwriter Ernest Lehman, he thought the lyrics were ridiculous. Like, why would Puerto Ricans be saying this? We have to give some context to this, or counterpart, right? Which goes to the revision of the America lyrics, which then turns the song into at least a political argument, if not a political statement, right? With the boys, and it's important that we remember that is not how it existed in the original show. With the boys saying, no, this sucks. Yeah, everything free in America. If you're a white in America, free to do anything you choose, free to wait tables and shine shoes. This is not a passive text, right? And certainly from there, right, comes and of course, Anita, what I refer to as the Americanization of Anita, with the strict emphasis on consumption, the immigrant experience as consumption. Look at my dresses, look at my washing machine. I'll take the terrace apartment, better get rid of your accent. There is that conflict that ultimately becomes undone when Anita faces not just prejudice, right? Spick, Bernardo's tramp, Bernardo's dog, but the trauma of sexual assault, right? Which is not just a sexual violation, but it's also racially based. All the dialogue from the Jets leading to the sexual assault on Anita is racially charged, right? It's because she is one of those, right? And it's Anita who stands up and turns around with her tears in her eyes. Bernardo was right. This is trauma. This is terrible. And West Side Story, in that sense, I mean, one of the questions that my students used to ask that led me to bother myself going back to West Side Story was why this is the only movie that doesn't have a happy ending. Because I take the term classical very, very seriously, right? So yes, there are outliers, of course there are, but there wasn't a movie like West Side Story that was as successful, as popular, as artistically achieved, highly achieved, and that ended with everybody dead and sad at the end, And so the revolutionary part of the movie in terms of the history of the genre is the denial of the historical convention, the premise that first, that there aren't any social problems in the classical, or racial for that matter, in the classical musical, but that song and dance will set us free. If we just, the typical conflict of the classical musical is very shallow. Oh my God, big movie star and little chorus girl singing in the rain. Will they ever be able to get together? Yes, of course.
Or let's put on a show.
Let's put on a show, and then we neutralize all the tension, right? And that doesn't happen in West Side Story. We end up on a very sad note with a bunch of dead people around, and the acknowledgement that it's not over, right? And that, so that in a way, the basic premise of the classical musical was no longer tenable. Does that mean that the classical musical disappeared? No, but it meant that there was now a different standard to look at, right? And interestingly, instead of the classical musical really revising itself again, sort of politically, what we continue to have is revivals of West Side Story. We just go back to West Side Story when we want to remind ourselves that the musical can be political and that it can be socially conscious. And here we are, right? 2020, 2021, in a time of great concern, a time of political unrest, of racial unrest, of social unrest. What do? The Broadway revival and the West Side and the Steven Spielberg movie. Let's go back to West Side Story and take a look again, maybe with slightly different eyes, but essentially at the same product.
And essentially because the country's in turmoil, and we need to stop and look at this.
Right, which shows why it continues to be relevant, and why 20 years from now we're going to have another revival of West Side Story. I hope not another movie. We don't need more movies, but another revival and another.
Well, it means you have to write another book. You have to write another book now. Okay. Wow. Let's go to the casting, because that has caused a lot of rumbling lately about who gets to tell the story and who gets to represent in the story. And you have a very, very long section on how the casting was done for the 1961 film, which really surprised me. And maybe we can talk about the influence that West Side Story has in terms of casting in other programs that have followed in its wake.
And what I want to say about that, and as you know, I have a few slides that I'd like to share in a few minutes, as long as you're ready. But that we cannot expect to change practice, particularly industrial practices, from one day to the next. The 1957 show, including two actual Puerto Ricans in the cast, right? Chita Rivera and Jaime Sanchez, who is the original Chino, Virginia, and who is from Rincon, who was born in Rincon, our neighboring town of Rincon, Puerto Rico. That's Jaime Sanchez, the original Chino. In 1961, we have a few background dancers, for the most part, of Latino or Puerto Rican descent. I mentioned the specific casting agent in Los Angeles who sent these people to Robert Wise and his producers, the Irish brothers. And then Rita Moreno, who gets her first really juicy leading part. And she may not have more screen time, but Anita is the heart of West Side Story. She may not get as much stage time, and the most complex character, being the one that goes through the most visible change, right, arc, right? Without change, there is no narrative. And that is
Hopefully his sound will come back and his video. He's in Colorado.
That is Anita. Whoops. Are we moving?
Now we hear you well.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was saying, Anita is the heart of the show, whereas Tony and Maria can be kind of boring and bland, however beautiful they may be, doesn't matter. And so each iteration has allowed for a little more conscious seek out of Latino or specifically Puerto Rican talent, which still doesn't make it a perfect experience. As I said a little earlier when we were speaking in private, that there's still certain patterns in casting that continue to be real and that are genuinely problematic, while at the same time, you look around, every major Hispanic performer in theater, film, or otherwise, at some point, points to West Side Story as being influential or an inspiration, right? Is it perfect? No. Did I see West Side Story when I was in high school and said, I can do that? Yeah, Rosie Pérez, Jennifer Lopez, you name them, right? They point to West Side Story as something that looked like an open door. Yet, it doesn't take away the problems that I address and that I can address it if you let me in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Ready when you are?
Yeah,
Sure.
we're ready.
We're ready.
Yeah.
You want me to do that? I'll try to not be redundant or not be too redundant and to move a little fast. Okay. Tell me what you see. Yes.
Yes.
We're seeing the right thing. So, and these are mostly notes. I have a forthcoming article on the Cambridge Companion to West Side Story, where I go a little more deeper into some of these issues, right? Yes, there is Rita Moreno actually touching my book with her real hand, with my uncle, Hector Acevedo. This was when she was launching the Rita Moreno, a memoir, 2014, I think she was in San Juan. Actually, it says 2018, that would have been 2014. I'm wrong there. Bernardo was right? We've been here briefly, and wait a minute, is this the right?
We have.
Yes, this is the right. Sorry, I wasn't sure that I was in the right document. But yes, as I've argued elsewhere, right, there's the question of community, very important, that the Sharks are the only, compared to the Jets, the Sharks really demonstrate a sense of community. We know where they work, we know where they live. We see the neighborhood in transition with the changing colors and the language, Spanish signs here and there, which is where the resentment comes for the Jets. Of course, it's something that Tony Kushner was telling us a couple of weeks ago, right? He made a very similar point, right? Bernardo was right. Anita's sentence, in both senses of the word, while the Sharks show an immigrant experience that is at least initially promising and ends up being quite a disappointment, right? Terrible time in America, while at the same time the Jets are always much more amorphous, right? Lieutenant Trent calls them immigrant scum. And I'm going to move a little faster because these are things that we know. But while to start with the origin of everything, the 1957 Broadway show, and to an even bigger extent, the 1961 movie really puts forward the Sharks as protagonists. This is something we've never seen before. Maybe Riff gets more screen time, but the narrative agency shifts at one point to Bernardo and then Anita. Paradoxically, though, the problem that I continue to have is the certainly perceived emphasis on white, there is the potential of a whitening narrative Tony causing, so to speak, the Americanization of Maria, but also the casting patterns that seem to really set apart the two really important female leads. And again, Tony Kushner was saying this a couple of weeks ago. The Jets women are nearly invisible. They're in the background. They say 2 or 3 lines, whereas Maria and Anita both have protagonist roles. But the casting pattern of these two main Puerto Rican parts remains somewhat problematic in terms of temperament and ethnicity, right? So we have the stage production, which offers the dichotomy of light and dark contrast between Maria's and Anita's persona as characters, and also in casting. Maria is played up as innocent, right? New to the continental US, inexperienced. When I look at Chino, nothing happens. I'm the only one there in a white dress. I've not yet learned how to play that game. And Anita, by contrast, is a typical, I would say, iteration of the Latin Spitfire, right? And that stereotype, we know, goes back a long, long time, but in the movies, it became most prominent in the persona of actors like Carmen Miranda, and specifically Lupe Vélez, who was the original in the movies, quote, Latin Spitfire or Mexican Spitfire, right? Okay, why? Oh, here we go. So the casting of whiter or white actor in the role of Maria goes back to the original production in 1957. Carol Lawrence, great soprano, was a Italian American, while the role of Anita goes to Chita Rivera, who was actually New Rican with real Latino roots, real Puerto Rican roots. And then, you know, we get the curly hair, the big loop earrings in very close and very evident contrast to the to Maria, that is proffered, so to speak, as a contrast, right? But that contrast is not just about participation, it's about ethnicity, and it's also about dress, right? Carol Lawrence won the role of Maria. She had to speak accented, but of course, there is I was trying to illustrate, there are differences of costume, makeup, and movement. The fact that the part of Maria is largely a non-dancing part. And pretty much since then, the female actors identified with Maria, especially Natalie Wood, because by definition, movies get a lot more eyeballs than theater, would continue to fall into the wider category, sort of associated with her modesty and lack of sexual experience, right? In contrast to Anita's Spitfire persona. That starts with Chita Rivera on Broadway and Rita Moreno in the 1961 movie, right? Making this dichotomy like really visible, right? To the point, as Rita Moreno has indicated in her memoir and in many interviews, the fact that all the sharks had to wear the same brown face makeup, they had to all be the same color, so to speak, and that was a very dark brown, much darker than Rita Moreno's naturally kind of lighter skinned brown, while the sharks, right, are presumably, right, a mix of New Yorkers born in New York, but they still all had to look the same, right? They couldn't be any, as Frances Negron Montaner has written, there couldn't be any ethnic misreading of their identity. They had to be visibly darker, with the exception of Maria, which was always allowed to be a little lighter skinned, right? Anita's persona also becomes imbued with sexuality, right? Which in the case of Rita Moreno, it was a version of the Barefoot Princess that she'd been playing since the 1950s, right? Priscila Peña Ovalle wrote of the Latin Spitfire, right? A version of femininity that signified looseness or excessive female sexuality through hoop earrings, long and wild hair, an off-the-shoulder blouse, and bad attitude. I love that that last bit there. Mm-hmm. By contrast, right, the recently transplanted Maria in her white dress and her ingenue manner is unequivocally characterized as virginal, a disparity that is further emphasized by the casting of a white or whiter actor as Maria, as Natalie Wood of Eastern European descent, and Rita Moreno in her brown face, right, in the 1961 movie. Also, there's the loose, the loose blouse that Priscila Peña Ovalle mentions. The 1980 Broadway revival, there was a contemporary article in the New York Times which describes, and this I found really telling, describes the two female characters, quote, the one is ethereal, fawn-like, the other is a little firecracker, sizzling and popping on. Of course, the article was referring respectively to the roles of Maria and Anita. Tellingly, Maria was played by the Puerto Rican actress Josie de Guzman, who was required to dye her hair darker, but not her face, at least. And while the part of Anita went to Debbie Allen, who's a very distinguished African-American dancer and choreographer. You can see in the playbill, right? There's Josie de Guzman, second from left, and Anita, Debbie Allen as Anita to the right. The article goes further in typecasting of Anita, right? Describing Allen's outfit for the interview as, quote, a fox jacket with free swinging skins, a knit dress in fire engine red, and shiny cowboy boots to match. But there is no such description of what Josie de Guzman was wearing, right? While on the contrary, aligning the actress Josie de Guzman, who the author described as, quote, deeply religious, like the girl whose role she plays, being sort of philosophical there. Arthur Lawrence directed the 2009 revival, where, as we know, there were some lyrics that were briefly translated to Spanish, indeed by Lin-Manuel Miranda, on specifically I Feel Pretty and The Boy Like That. Those lyrics didn't fall down okay with major audiences, and they were switched back to English. And I know because I saw the shows a few months apart on Broadway, and the first time the lyrics were in Spanish, ese cabrón mató a tu hermano, and the second, yeah, that's what it said. And the second time I saw it, it was the same song in English as always, right? Karen Olivo won the Tony Award for the role of Anita. Now, while at the same time, Josefina Scaglione, who's an Argentinian musical theater actress of Italian descent, played Maria, when Lawrence said that he could not find the right Maria, presumably among thousands of applicants, right? And once again,
wow.
there's a distinction, a visible distinction in, complexion. And also, of course, Karen Olivo had like curlier hair in the show. I remember because I saw it twice with this particular cast, whereas Josefina Scaglione was not required to do anything like that on stage or off. There's Karen Olivo with the sort of frizzled dark hair. And then there's the question of movement, right? And this is very visible. The part of Maria is hardly a dancing part. There's very little dancing required. And dancing, of course, we would also sort of associate as a cliche of sexuality, right? I mean, dancing, anyone who's ever read Jane Austen knows that dancing is the preamble for sexual activity, for coupling, right? Anyone, Jane Austen, it's essential. We all know that. Costume and movement along with complexion and color, right? The third season of Glee did what I call an appropriation of West Side Story, because they really butchered all they were doing. with once again the white diva of Jewish Ashkenazi descent, Leah Michelle, winning the role of Maria against the African-American, the eternal diva in waiting, which is played by Amber Riley. Because of course the suggestion of a Black Maria as provocative, I would love to see it, a Black Maria, would be too much for the television audiences, especially the younger audiences. Nevertheless, the role of Anita goes by what I call brown default to Santana Lopez, also of New Rican and Afro-Caribbean descent. Rest in peace, she died last year tragically. Who is the only openly Latina character in the main cast of Glee. And what I found most telling in my analysis of the Glee appropriation of West Side Story is that we never see Santana audition for the part of Anita, while the casting of Maria was a big cliffhanger on several episodes. Like Santana Lopez was the only choice for Anita. So that contrast is drawn between Anita's type and Maria's visibly wider, more demure fashion. This time again played by a straight white actress, conforming to the historic pattern that I referred to in one of my writings. One sassy, sexy, and brown, Anita naturally, the other virginal, modest, and white, Maria naturally. So that alignment of whiteness with modesty, ethereal, fawn-like, and brownness with the Spitfire stereotype was firmly upheld in the Glee appropriation of West Side Story, right? I used to have this picture in color, I couldn't find it now, but then we have Anita in the A Boy Like That, which of course they're not supposed to be wearing these costumes, because these has the costumes for the gym, the dance at the gym, but Anita shows up all kind of Carmen-like. This, you can imagine, was a fire engine red dress with the rose in her hair, and Maria, as usual, the only one in white. Very visible contrast. Now we're coming to the contemporary context, which I've already suggested is really important, because we're back to West Side Story because it matters. We're back to West Side Story because we can start conversations about it, about racial tensions, about intolerance, about political instability, about sexism. So we had the 2020, very short-lived 2020 Ivo Van Hove revival, where not only did the Sharks retain their Latina identity, but it was now also kind of reinvented for 2020 audiences with a really multi-ethnic cast that included an interesting swap of the typical role assignment, giving this time giving us a darker Maria and a lighter skinned Anita, right? Yesenia Ayala and Shireen Pimentel, both ethnically right. And this is why we're seeing these efforts to, quote, get it right in these contemporary productions. Unfortunately, although I read the reviews, maybe not so unfortunately, the Ivo Van Hove revival closed on March 13th of 2020 for some mysterious reason. That said, right, we're back to the Steven Spielberg movie, and in a meeting in San Juan on December 14th, 2018, Steven Spielberg was there with Tony Kushner. This was posted on Facebook like the next day. He said, we really want to get it right. And as we know, Bobby Sanabria, Virginia, Sanchez, Korrol, a number of other important consultants were involved in this movie, including myself. We've seen this real effort to get it right, to be absolutely important, said Spielberg, to ensure the authenticity, props, signage, dialect. Virginia can talk about this more than me, for sure. We can only go to the experts, right? This is going to be a different West Side Story in terms of the cultural context and the historic context and the ethnic casting. Yet, in the end, we end up again with a visibly darker Anita, Ariana DeBose, magnificent, by the way, visibly lighter skin, both Latinas, both bona fide for the ethnic composition of the sharks, but also one more time, sort of insistence on, well, less modest dress, curly hair, darker skin, in contrast to what Maria looks like and what Maria does and how Maria acts in the movie, right? But don't forget, December 10th, only in theaters. This is kind of what I've been worrying myself about the last year. Now, and I'm not talking about the new movie, which of course we have with non-disclosure agreements. We know what we can and cannot say. But the insistence of this pattern that Anita is supposed to look a certain way and Maria is supposed to look a certain other way, and that distinguishes not just the actors but the persona of the characters, that it has to be visible that they are different people and that they have different, I mean, of course, we know that Anita and Bernardo have some kind of, they have sexual activity among them.
Okay, hopefully he'll come back.
Okay. That's
Always the virgin, always the virgin. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ernesto,
it's
sorry,
interesting.
We missed a few words there. Can you just hopefully summarize what you said in that last sentence?
I was just saying that we see again, well, that we know that Anita, we know from the show and from the movie that Anita and Bernardo are sexually active. There's a number of references to their sexual activity. I'm going to take Mom, Pop, but you and Bernardo in the balcony of the movies, right? So, and I'll shred this too. Anyway, and while Maria expresses in no uncertain terms her lack of sexual experience, right? Have I ever even touched excitement? So ultimately, what happens with skin tone and movement and dress is really important in that dichotomy of the dark and sexy and the white and virginal.
And also what happens with color in terms of the filming of particular scenes plays into that same theory. I'm thinking of Maria with the white dress being virginal, but what does she add to the white dress? A red strap around her waist. And if you start to pay attention to, if this all impacts upon you, you know that something's going to happen.
Right.
The other thing that's interesting about, but the other thing that's interesting is that where I was interested in the clip about Steven Spielberg speaking to an audience of filmmakers and community people in Puerto Rico. And about a year later, after we actually began production, and most of us were on board then, either as part of the advisory group or with the film, that he gave an interview to Vanity Fair where he talks about the New Rican experience. So that it's an interesting contrast in his own growth and his own maturation of the idea that this film is important as a New York film. So
very much so.
Yeah,
so that's fascinating.
I'd like to jump in and just go back to what Ernesto was saying about Anita and Maria. While I really look forward to this remaking and seeing the film, as a Puerto Rican who saw this movie when I was in junior high school, right, in the late 1970s, early 80s, and now this is the 60th anniversary, and we have many Puerto Rican artists, singers. I was so disappointed. She is Latina, so I applaud that Maria is Latina, but I wanted Maria to be an actual Puerto Rican who can actually, maybe even from the island, who would play this part. And so I was so disappointed. We waited 60 years to have a role that we can play, and we're still not cast, right? So one of my students asked that question in the chat. How do you feel on Maria being played by the Colombian American in the upcoming West Side Story movie revival, especially after having them say that they want to get it right? So, any insights or comments on that? I have that disappointment about this because when Virginia first said, "Hey, look who's playing," so I looked her up and I said, "Oh, she is beautiful. She sings beautifully, but she's not Puerto Rican." I'm glad she's Latina for sure, but that was my first reaction.
Are you asking me?
Yes, if you'd like to comment on that.
So only I'll preface my comment by saying that I have signed a non-disclosure agreement about certain things. It's not a secret who the casting are because that's been on IMDb for 2 years, right? Mm-hmm. Personally, I as the person who sometimes in certain scholarly circles goes against the grain. I'm the one who defends West Side Story while acknowledging the problems, right, that all the other scholars who came before me have pointed to. But the short answer is I don't care. I'm happy that it is a genuine Latino.
We're losing him.
Colorado's having bad weather, I understand.
Oh, hopefully he'll come back in a moment. That was
but
I asked the question.
To pick up on this, a lot of the role of Maria has to do with an operatic voice, and I think that was one of the key determinant factors in the women that they had tested. But I think if Ernesto's going to say what I thought he was going to say, I feel that that we all have something to be proud of. So
yeah, we lost him completely, but he'll come back in hopefully. Okay. And I guess I don't understand the whole thing about the opera. I never looked at West Side Story and said, this is opera. So perhaps you can clarify?
Yeah. Well, one of the points that Bobby Sanabria had made was that the score of West Side Story is probably the most difficult to perform because it's got so much in it from different musical genres. And it does have lyric opera. So that you have to be I'm at a loss of who to compare it to, but it has to be somebody who is a trained voice for lyric opera. At the same time, it has Mexican music and it has American hip hop music. It's got a lot of different components in it, and the voices had to fit. I mean, Anita doesn't sing the songs that Maria is going to sing, and when they do that, there's one song where it has 4 parts to it. You need to have 4 different types of voices to make the sound of the quartet. It's a quintet. It's 5, and that is tonight. We're going to rumble tonight. That song. You have the shark singing parts of it, you have the jet singing parts of it, you have Maria and Anita, and you have there's and Tony singing parts of it. So that I think a lot of it, judging from Ernesto's book on West Side Story, I was surprised to learn that there were quite a few Latina actresses. We didn't have that many Puerto Rican actresses at that time. That was 60 years ago. But we did have a number of Latina actresses who were singers, and very, very few of them could actually reach the heights in the music that the score demanded. And they ended up with Natalie Wood for her acting, but her singing is dubbed, right? And there was a great deal of quite a few of the leading characters were dubbed, and so that's not the case with the 2021 movie by no stretch of the imagination, or the Broadway plays that have been put on recently. I'm wondering if we have any questions from the audience also that we might be able to pick up on.
The Professor Santiago indicated that in her class that the students should be connecting the dots on their conversation on colorism, right? In terms of the casting that has been done historically and that's still reflected even in this forthcoming one. So that's about it. I don't see any others, but please feel free to ask. Professor Santiago, I see your hand up. Why don't you just unmute yourself?
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Professor. So I have to be honest and tell you that I've never been a fan of West Side Story. And I don't know if I'm the only one. And I think it's because of this, I guess just not being able to connect and just like some of these negative connotations that the movie had. So I just wanted to say that I really appreciate the series, and I actually integrated it within my curriculum. So I'm not teaching on these days because I want my class to be a part of this. And it's a little, selfish on my part too, because I think this is just fascinating and it's letting me create, what's the word, just value, I think, and an appreciation for the movie and I guess the background, the history, some of these like very subliminal messages that I didn't catch. And I don't think I allowed myself to catch because I was so turned off by the movie altogether. And I guess from just the surface. So I just wanted to say I really enjoy these talks and hearing Mr. Acevedo speak. It was just like really like just I'm connecting dots for myself and have a lot of aha moments in what he's saying. And now I want to watch the movie again with that other lens. So I don't know if anyone else is is like me out there where it's like so disgusted by the movie. But this was just a very, very nice for me as I get into the work and also in teaching students about, creating this awareness of like finding more information of why things are happening, how things happened, and really looking at the history of it. So thank you very much for that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it is very generational, as we had mentioned in one of the past discussions, right?
Mm-hmm.
That for those of us who were sort of hungering and starving for Latinx, Puerto Rican representation of any kind, the younger generation, right, had some more of that. They had J-Lo, they had Mark Anthony, they had other actors, and Raúl Juliá, etc. Look.
I just want to tell you that Dr. Acevedo-Muñoz is trying to come back in on his telephone. I know my Colorado's been having some really, really bad weather. So I would expect that's one of the causes. But thank you, Professor Santiago, for your comments, because that they were great. That's great to hear. I know that if any of you are interested in really getting into this fully, you should read Dr. Acevedo-Muñoz's book, because it is an eye-opener. And and not because I'm a historian, but I read it as if it were a novel. I was going through it so fast because the information was amazing. The fights, the not coming in on time for a production, the casting, the people that they tested and then brought back, the dubbing of the music, the whole shift. I know that Tony Kushner mentioned last time that one of the big shifts in the conceptualization of the movie comes about when they realize that all of a sudden here the protagonists of these Puerto Rican street gangs, they're fighting for turf, and there the Romeo and Juliet story changes. You just don't know what you're going to do with them, and so the creativity that goes into making the film and writing the screenplay is phenomenal. So do we have anybody else who is asking questions?
Kene Onwugbolu says, of course I haven't seen the new movie, but based on the trailer, I love how Anita tells Maria, if you go with him, Tony, no one will ever forgive you. And I like that there's this sense of community and that your actions and choices affect everyone, not just you. And that is true, right? So you have the concept of familism, right, that we study. And so the whole thing of putting family first, family comes first. You can't put an outsider, right, first before your family. And of course, I think that's what Dr. Acevedo-Muñoz was talking about when he said that Tony Americanizes Maria, right? Because her choice is Tony in the end, right? Which for Latinx cultures, Latin American cultures, Puerto Rican culture, it should really be family, right? And the whole thing that even Anita, once they find out that Bernaldo is dead at the hands of Tony, she tells Anita, please go tell Tony we're gonna run away together. And Anita says no, but then she switches right away.
He's joined. He's
yeah.
back, I think.
I
maybe Alex can let him in.
But that whole thing,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
There he goes.
This has never happened to me before.
Welcome back.
It happens in my office, not in my house. Well,
welcome back. Would you please, we have just a few minutes, like 3 minutes. So if you can tell us your final thoughts and comments.
Just to go back to where we were briefly, I think the last thing I know I was saying was that regarding casting of Rachel Ziegler, she's not Puerto Rican. I'm okay with Jennifer.
Here we go. Nope.
It's not going to work.
No, the weather is disrupting things today. But just to finish up about familism, right? That is something that we see, and we know that some parts of the movie are unrealistic. We'll see how the new movie handles that. Yeah. But familism, right, is a strong cultural factor.
But then this is one of the points that you want to make about our times, the times that we live in today. Whereas someone had commented on my book, Colonia to Community, how families stayed together, how they lived close to one another, and how that no longer happens. We are gradually, generation by generation, we begin to incorporate others into our family structure, and you gain some and you lose some, but the reality is that this does happen, and it happens everywhere, but it's happening here very clearly. Okay, stay with us.
Yes. Welcome back. We have 1 minute, unfortunately.
Right. Just to finish, if Jennifer Lopez can play Italian American, then Rachel Ziegler can play Puerto Rican. I'm okay with that. That's where we were.
Where did Jennifer Lopez play?
Out of sight. Out of sight.
Out of sight.
And
That's
she's also played non-ethnic parts. So I'm okay with that. Yeah, she's an actor. She's an actor.
Okay. And my question to you.
And opportunities don't come very often, so she has to take.
Yeah. My question to you was about creative art and the freedom of the artist to create the art that he wants. What Tony Kushner talked about last week. Could you just wrap it up with that?
Right. And it makes.
I don't believe this.
No. Okay. It appears he won't have a few last words here. Josiah Estrella, just let me read. I agree, casting is so incredibly important to make the story seem more authentic and really tell the story, especially in West Side Story, where casting is critical to keep the culture message of the movie present. Brittany Hernandez says, I liked how Ernesto focused on the casting because sometimes we don't realize how important casting is in a production. In my opinion, it was just as important as the screenwriting. That is how audience relates as well. I think we should end it here and thank Dr. Acevedo-Muñoz.
Perfect sense.
Apologize for the difficulties. Virginia, any last words?
No, I think at least we got some of the questions in, so that was important. I think my last words.
Ernesto, I see him. So he's here. Let me put him back.
Yeah, okay. No, he's coming in and out, but my last words would be to thank him. Just to thank you for an incredible hour of discussion and to let you know that we have a very large audience and quite a few students who I hope are going to run home and buy your book and read it. based on what you've said. And just to let everyone know that in 2 weeks, our speaker will be Juan González, who will be talking about street gangs and political activism in the community, and hopefully he's going to tell us some stories about his personal experiences with the young lords.
I just want to say Tony Kushner answered the artist question very well last week. West Side Story was created by 4 gay Jewish New Yorkers who were outsiders. From, as Arthur Lawrence wrote, I write about outsiders. So this group of outsiders will do for what we want to say. And Tony made perfect sense of that last time as well. So that's what I'd say about the artist. And it's legitimate so long as we do it with respect, which we've seen in this new movie. So.
Well, thank you for being with us, and I definitely look forward to many more roles, many more films about Latinxs in the United States, played by Latinxs themselves, written by Latinxs, performed by Latinxs, etc. So I really look forward to that, and thank you for sharing your knowledge with us and your expertise, and I do have my students reading part of your book, so thank you for that as well. Be well, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Adios, thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing.